Now, see, the archetype is a force. It has an autonomy. It can suddenly seize you. It is like a seizure. So, for instance, falling in love at first sight, that is such a case.
We think, certainly in the beginning stages of relationship, there's generally a lot of projection mixed up with it. And that is responsible for all those love quarrels. I mean, she makes demands which he can't fulfill, and he makes demands she can't fulfill. And if you tape record a love quarrel, it's the same all over the world, literally.
You need to know that you are putting energy out into other people that is yours. And it's not only your worst, it's your best.
The notion that we are alone in ourselves, that we are the masters of our house, that we make the important choices in our lives, using will and conscious intention, is an immature and unconscious point of view. There lives in us a vast inner world, full of personalities with wills of their own. One example is falling in love. We are sure it comes from the outside. This woman, this man, we say we fell in love with them, while the deeper reason lives within. An internal influence, an inner image of the other sex, anima or animus, that lives in us and finds a reflection in the outer person. If we want to become more conscious, mature, whole, to further our individuation, we must reflect on the things we compulsively, instinctively, love and hate. These are hidden parts of our own soul, our own psyche, calling us through projection, apparently from outside of us. Those parts seek integration into our personality and life. Projection is one way they get our attention. What in this person do I find irresistible, magical, comforting? And what do I find repulsive, stupid, evil? All those things we are attracted to or fight in the other. A person, a gender, a political party, a country, a culture, a religion, hold parts of our life energy, libido. Some of that libido is gold we refuse to own, some is shadow we refuse to admit. Both ours. The more parts of ourselves we recognize, the less we fight our own shadows through others, or fall under a spell and lose our power and wisdom. Then our relationships become significantly better. We see more of the other as they are, not as we are. We don't suffocate them. We give them space to be themselves, and beautiful things come from it. When we don't become aware of our projections, we burden others with our expectations that they be a certain way. We try to control them into serving the role we unconsciously assign to them, and that is a recipe for a destructive relationship. Withdraw the projection, return what is ours to our soul, and free the other to be human. When we reflect on what we project onto the other, we open a path into real love with those we want to love, and a chance for peace with those we instinctively want to fight. If we want to be in life and not be lured out of it, we must become more conscious. We must know ourselves better, decide for life with courage, and be willing to suffer consciously, not run away in numbing and destructive ways. We suffer anyway, but when it is conscious, life and growth can come from it. I wish us that kind of path, deeper into life with courage, and away from blindly straying out of fear and boredom. I invite you to listen to some of the best teachers that have helped me on my journey. Carl Jung, Marie-Louise von Franz, Marion Woodman, and Edward Edinger.
Now, see, the archetype is a force. It has an autonomy. It can suddenly seize you. It is like a seizure. So, for instance, falling in love at first sight, that is such a case. You see, you have a certain image in yourself without knowing it of the woman, of the real woman. Now you see that girl, or at least a good imitation of your type, and instantly you get a seizure, and you're gone. And afterwards, you may discover that it was a hell of a mistake. Yeah. Or you see, a man is quite capable, or he's intelligent enough to see that that woman of his choice, that one says, not no choice, he had been captured. He sees that she's no good at all, that she's a hell of a business. And he tells me so. And he said, for God's sake, doctor, help me to get rid of that woman. He can't. He's like clean of things. And that is the archetype. Why is always inclined to explain these things by external influences.
Now, one of the, of course, very fundamental ideas in the original psychoanalytic theory was Freud's conception of the libido as sort of a broad psychic sexual energy. Of course, we all know that you began to feel that, that Dr. Freud might have had perhaps a little bit too much stress on sexuality in his theory. Now, when did you begin first feeling this? In other words, was this the sort of a feeling that you had almost from the beginning? Or as time went by, did you begin to feel this way?
Well, you see, in the beginning, I had naturally certain prejudice against his conceptions. And after a while, I overcame them. I could do that from going to my biological training. And I could not deny the importance of the sexual instinct, you know.
Yes.
But later on, I saw that it was very one-sided. Because, you see, man is not only governed by the sex instinct, there are other instincts as well. For instance, in biology, you see, the nutritional instinct is just as important as the sex instinct. Also, in primitive societies, sexuality plays a role much smaller than food. Food is the all-important interest and desire. Sex, that is something I can have everywhere. They are not shy. But the food is difficult to obtain, you see?
Yes.
And so it is the main interest. And then in other societies, for instance, in civilized societies, the power drive plays a much greater role than sex. For instance, there are many big businessmen who are impotent because their whole energy is going into money making or dictating the laws to everybody else. That's much more interesting than affairs with women.
So, in a sense, as you began to look over Dr. Freud's emphasis on the sexual drive, you began to think in terms of other cultures and broader ideas, and it began to seem to you that this wasn't really an emphasis that was universal or sufficiently universal to be important.
Well, you know, I couldn't help seeing it because I had studied Nietzsche. I knew the works of Nietzsche very well. He was had been a professor at Bali University, you know, and that the air was full of talk about Nietzsche. And so naturally I had studied his works here and there. I saw an Italian psychology, which was also psychology, perfectly competent psychology, but all built upon the power drive.
Do you think it's possible that Dr. Freud was either ignoring Nietzsche or had perhaps not wanted to be influenced by Nietzsche?
His personal motivation. Well, of course, it was a personal prejudice. You see, it happened to be his main point. You know, certain people are chiefly looking for this side and other people to another side. So, you see, the inferior Dr. Adler, the younger, the weaker, naturally had a power complex. He wanted to be the successful man. Freud was a successful man. He was on top, and so he was interested only in pleasure. in the pleasure principle, and while Arthur was interested in the power drive.
I see. You feel that it's sort of a function of his own personality to some degree.
Yeah, it is quite natural. You see, it is one of the two ways how to deal with reality. Either you make reality an object for your pleasure, if you are powerful enough already, you make it an object of your desire to grab it or
Now-
process it.
Some observers have thought that perhaps the patients that Dr. Freud saw in Vienna of this period were often individuals who were repressed sexually, and perhaps that so many of these patients having been of this type,
Yes.
that this may have been one thing that sort of reinforced Dr.
Yeah.
Freud's ideas. In other words, in a sense that the Viennese society was a rather, quote, repressed society. Now, would you think that this might have been a factor?
Well, that is certainly so. That in the end of the Victorian age, there was a reaction going over the whole world against the taboos, the sex taboos.
Yeah.
One didn't understand anymore why not. And Freud belongs into that time, a sort of liberation of the mind of such taboos.
But the reaction then against the sort of tight, inhibited
Yes, yes.
culture he was living in.
Oh, yes. And you see, Freud in that way, or on that side, really belonged to the category of a Nietzschean mind. Nietzsche had liberated Europe from a great deal of such prejudices, but concerning the power type, our illusions as to the motivations of our morality, and was a time critical of morality.
And so then, in a sense, Dr. Freud was taking it in another direction, and it was equal amount of force.
And then, moreover, it is sex being the main instinct, the predominating instinct in a more or less safe society, where the social conditions are more or less safe. There, sexuality is apt to predominate because people are taken care of, they have their positions, they have enough food, no
Yeah.
question of hunting and seeking food or something like that. Then it is quite probable that the patients you meet have more or less all a certain sexual complex.
So this is, in a sense, then the drive on that particular society most likely to be inhibited.
It is a sort of finesse almost when you find out that somebody has a power drive. And where sex only serves the purpose of power. For instance, a charming man, all women think he's the real hero of all hearts. He's a power devil. Like a Don Juan, The woman is not his problem. His problem is how to dominate. You see? And so you see, in the second place, after sex comes the power drive. And even that is not the end.
It is so important in our culture that we recognize that our seedbed is power. And however we may try to disguise that, if we are honest, we have to come back to that point. Work in our journals, recognize when we were helping somebody or when we were making certain plans, we had another agenda. The unconscious picks up that other agenda and it interferes with the relationship. Just to demonstrate how infiltrated we are with this, turn on the soap operas in the afternoon and you'll hear some whining beauty or some whining little girl saying, "Oh, I love you so much, darling. I love you. I love you. You will do what I want you to do, won't you, darling? And I just wish that some man would say, no, I won't. It might wake the both of them up. Because that is coming from power. It's contemptible that two adult people can fall for that kind of relationship. But it is the shadow of power in both people. Another way of checking that out is through projections. You can find in your dreams how you project onto others. For example, you may say, of all the people in the world I do not like, why does she appear in my dreams? Over and over, there she is, and I can't stand her. Crucial that you look at yourself and your behavior and claim that projection and say, yes, that is how I can act. I ask your friends who will tell you the truth. Some friends don't tell you the truth. That also can be power. But you need to know that you are putting energy out into other people that is yours. And it's not only your worst, it's your best. So that you pull that back and you recognize power or whatever it happens to be. If it is the best side, you may be projecting your capacity to write, your capacity to sing. Whatever that divine contrasexual in you is, you are projecting, and you're putting a terrible load onto the person you're projecting onto. He isn't a god. You are not a goddess. And, you know, I've had men say to me, I give her beautiful gifts, and she looks at me, she never says anything, she says, thank you very much. But I know I have just missed somewhere, and I don't understand it. What he's not understanding is that she has projected a God onto him. He's perfection. And he's not living up to that perfection that she is projecting, nor is she taking the responsibility of relating to that inner God and freeing up the relationship that two human beings can truly love each other, not through the miasma of the projections, but as they are human beings. It's to come to the end of life and recognize that you were able to hold the divinity and the relationship to the divinity in both its demonic and its creative forms, and to recognize that you've had a wonderful human relationship, that you have remained in your own body. You have lived your muscles and your own breath and being a part of that reality. See, otherwise, if you get into that divinity and it turns on you, which it's bound to do, then you start yearning for that demon lover. And that demon lover will lure you out of life. And that will fit right in with your projection onto Daddy. Either he was so perfect that you couldn't live up to it, he was God, or it went in the demonic side and you did everything to escape it and you ran straight into it. Yes, it's painful. Von Franz says that we have spent years in the liberation of sexuality, and now the next 50 years are about the liberation of the heart. That's where we are. The anguish is immense because religions don't want to recognize the differences. Nationalities are different in their values. To live your own truth is not easy. But that's the direction that we are going. And we can see at the end of the line that having walked through that shit, we can also see the hand of God.
There seems to be around marriage a kind of avoidance and aversion now. So divorce is so easy, and it's happening, at least in the States, that people don't stay married very long. So they in a way, are they running from the shadow, do you think?
They are running either from the shadow or very often from animus and anima. That's the big complication between the sexes.
Mm-hmm.
If you live with somebody of the same sex, it's the shadow gets constellated. If you live with somebody of the other sex, then the bigger task comes. That's why it's the more valuable relationship, because it's also the bigger task.
Mm-hmm.
Because that constellates anima and animus. And as the average American nowadays doesn't know yet what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever animus and anima clash, they run apart. It's finished. They throw it over. If they stuck it out, they would learn a lot about themselves. That doesn't mean that we are not sometimes for divorce. There are situations you better think of a divorce. There are relationships where both partners become destructive to each other, plainly destructive.
Mm-hmm.
And then it is better to make a final decision. But there are others where it's just a clash of animus and anima, and if they could become conscious, they could get on again.
Well, what about the relationship between transference and love?
Well, in the transference, which is an expression which Jung took actually over from Freud, and Freud thought it was purely a projection of the parental image onto the partner and so on, and an Oedipal or Electra complex projected. That's why at the end of a Freudian therapy, you cut off, goodbye, we have never known each other. Projections are handed back and goodbye. While we think, certainly in the beginning stages of relationship, there's generally a lot of projection mixed up with it. And that is responsible for all those love quarrels. I mean, she makes demands which he can't fulfill, and he makes demands she can't fulfill, and animus anima crossing the swords. And I mean, if you tape record a love quarrel, it's the same all over the world, literally. And that is projection. And if people don't run away, but work it out and take back all what is projection in it, then appears or is peeled out of all this the true relationship. Now, it might be none. And then it would be like the Freudian thing, goodbye, and now I see you simply represented that and that in me, and thank you very much, goodbye. Or there might be a tremendous amount of relationship, true relationship built up, which is not the same thing as projection. And generally, in many, many cases, this is so, that a certain friendship and relationship results finally. After all, an analysis is a very intimate exchange of personality, so it would be ridiculous to leave each other afterwards and, not having known each other, so to speak, if it has been an honest analysis, where both partners have been honestly involved in it. So you can say the Transference implies that it is the beginning stage of still a lot of projection mixed up with it. And therefore, all these kind of compulsivenesses, people cry if you don't see them often enough, and childish demands and all that kind of trouble. And then it gets replaced slowly or purified into what you could call an objective relationship.
You will find the opposites by examining carefully whatever you love or hate. Socrates long ago said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And that's a very apt motto for process of individuation. You find the opposites by examining carefully whatever you love or hate. But this is an exceedingly difficult procedure because the inclination to examine does not usually accompany the passions of love and hate. But it is in our loves and our hates that the opposites reside. The very first sentence of Mysterium Coniunctionis reads this way, and this is really the essence of the whole book. He says, "The factors which come together in the coniunctio are conceived as opposites, either confronting one another in enmity or attracting one another in love." So the coniunctio as an archetype is operating every bit as much in fights as it is in loves. Those are the two ways that unconscious coniunctio energies express themselves, by hatreds or by attractions. So whenever we take too concretely an urge to love or hate, the coniunctio is exteriorized and thereby destroyed. The possibility of a conscious experience of the coniunctio is destroyed. If we are gripped by a strong attraction or a repulsion to a person or a thing, we should reflect on it. Jung says, quote, "Unless we prefer to be made fools of by our illusions, we shall, by carefully analyzing every fascination, extract from it a portion of our own personality, like a quintessence, and slowly come to recognize that we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." And similarly with our passionate antipathies, they must be subjected to full analytic scrutiny. We must ask ourselves, what persons do I hate? What groups or factions do I fight against? Because whatever they are, they're a part of me. I am bound to that which I hate as surely as I am bound to that which I love. Psychologically, the important thing is where one's libido is lodged, and not whether he is for or against a given thing. If you pursue such reflections diligently, you will gradually collect your scattered psyche from the outer world, like the dismembered body of Osiris. And it's this kind of work, which is the work of individuation, which creates the coniunctio and in the process promotes a net increase of consciousness in the world. So to conclude, the world is torn asunder by the strife between the opposites, a state of affairs that's grown progressively worse in the past 500 years. The strife between the opposites, what Jung calls the wretched isms. Emerson says, all men plume themselves on the improvement of society, and no man improves. As Jung puts it, if the individual is not truly regenerated in spirit, society cannot be either, for society is the sum total of individuals in need of redemption. And in another place, he makes this suggestion. If only a worldwide consciousness could arise that all division and all fission are due to the splitting of opposites in the psyche, then we should know where to begin. What does lie within our reach is the change in individuals who have or create for themselves an opportunity to influence others of like mind. I do not mean by persuading or preaching. I'm thinking rather of the well-known fact that anyone who has insight into his own actions and has thus found access to the unconscious involuntarily exercises an influence on his environment. End quote. That comes from paragraph 583 of volume 10. See, these individuals with insight into their own actions are the ones who, to a greater or lesser extent, have experienced the coniunctio. They're the ones who are aware of the fact that the opposites go to make up the psyche itself, and therefore go to make up one's own psyche, and therefore they become carriers of the opposites rather than exteriorizers of the opposites. And if society is to be redeemed, it will, according to the standpoint of Jungian psychology in a way, it will be done through the cumulative effect of such individuals. The idea is that when enough individuals can carry the consciousness of wholeness, the world itself will become whole.